The Harborview Fish Market in Port Sterling is always buzzing with energy. Stalls selling fresh catches and dried seafood line the narrow walkways, while the calls of vendors and the laughter of tourists blend into a unique, lively atmosphere. But this market wasn't always so welcoming. It holds a history marked by violence. There was a time when knife fights were common, a shadow of danger hanging over the stalls. Peace has settled now, but the tension of those days lingers in the memories of the older merchants. Don't mess with that stall over there. Got it. 20 years ago, that warning echoed through Harborview. It referred to the fish stall near the second entrance, run by Eleanor. To most, Eleanor looked like an ordinary vendor, slicing fish for her customers. But the longtime merchants knew better. They knew what she used to do. Look, those thugs are back again. In recent months, a group calling themselves the Sterling Boys had appeared at the market. Young men in dark shirts and sunglasses roamed the stalls, demanding money under the guise of offering protection. Most vendors paid quietly, preferring to avoid trouble and disrupt the market's peace. It's the second sector's turn today. Let's start with the fish stalls, instructed Vince, the leader of the Sterling Boys. 5 young men swaggered through the market, their eyes arrogant, their steps heavy with false authority. Merchants lowered their heads as they passed. "Hey, we haven't hit that fish stall by the second entrance, right?" One of Vince's crew asked. I glanced in. Just some old woman sitting there. Vince shrugged. Heard some rumors. Said not to mess with her. Come on, that's ancient history. We make the rules here now. Let's go, Vince declared, full of confidence. They headed towards Eleanor's stall. A small sign read Eleanor's Catch. Stepping inside, they were met with cool air conditioning and the sharp smell of fish. Eleanor was quietly filleting a large flatfish, a woman likely in her late 50s. She was slender but had noticeably strong, thick fingers. The razor-sharp filleting knife in her hand glinted as she expertly separated the flesh from the bone. She didn't even glance up as the thugs entered. Vince surveyed the small shop. There were no customers, just Eleanor working alone. He smirked and nodded to his crew. Business going well, ma'am? Eleanor didn't answer. Her hands moved rhythmically, precisely. Vince frowned, annoyed at being ignored. He stepped closer to the counter where Eleanor worked. To do business in this market, you need protection from the Sterling Boys. Looks like you haven't signed up yet. Still, Eleanor showed no reaction, her focus entirely on the fish and her knife. Vince's face reddened, his pride stung. His companions exchanged uneasy glances. Nice knife skills, Vince sneered, picking up a piece of freshly cut fish in the counter with a pair of wooden chopsticks he carried. But you don't have our permission to sell it. A subtle change flickered across Eleanor's face. Her eyes turned cold, but she remained silent. One of Vince's crew pulled out a ledger. The monthly protection fee is $500. First payment is up front. After that, we'll collect on the first week of every month. Outside, a crowd of merchants had gathered, watching with worried, tense expressions. An old-timer whispered to the person next to him. Heard back in the day, even 3 tough guys would back down when she drew her knife. Another merchant nodded. Remember that incident near Central Station? They used to call her Eleanor the Blade. One of Vince's crew overheard. He scoffed. The Sterling Syndicate? What's that? Nobody cares about that old stuff anymore. Finally, Eleanor put down her filleting knife. She slowly peeled off her work gloves. Thick scars marked each finger, testament to years of handling blades. No money. Get out, Eleanor said, her voice low, cold and firm, carrying the weight of years. Vince, enraged, slammed his hand on the counter. What did you say? You want to do business here. You follow the rules. You're no exception. Eleanor lifted her head and looked Vince straight in the eye. There was no fear in her gaze, only a profound chill. She slowly stood up. She wasn't tall, but her presence suddenly seemed to fill the small shop with an unexpected weight. This knife, Eleanor pointed to the filleting knife, is for customers. She reached under the counter and pulled out something else, a heavy, steel deboning knife. Its handle was worn smooth from long use. For punks like you, I use this. Eleanor began to sharpen the deboning knife with swift, practiced strokes against a steel rod. The rasping sound echoed in the shop. The onlookers held their breath. Vince's crew shifted nervously. "Hey, what are you doing? Are you crazy?" Vince yelled. In that instant, Eleanor's hand moved like lightning. It wasn't a wild swing, just an impossibly fast, precise flick near the counter. The wooden chopsticks Vince held snapped cleanly in two. A stunned silence fell. Vince stared dumbly at the broken chopsticks in his hand. Then at Eleanor, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Eleanor stood relaxed, as if nothing had occurred. "I won't say it again. Get out." Her voice was low but hard as steel, her eyes glinting with danger. A chill ran down the spines of the young thugs. Vince tried to salvage his pride. "Do you know who we are? You think we'll back down because of some old lady?" His voice trembled slightly despite his bravado. Eleanor slapped the heavy deboning knife down flat on the counter with a sharp crack. The young men flinched. "I won't say a third time." Eleanor slowly walked around the counter towards them. There was a strange rhythm to her steps, like a predator closing in on its prey. Vince's crew instinctively backed away. "Boss, let's just go." "Something's not right here," one whispered urgently. Vince realized the situation was spiraling out of his control. He made a last attempt to save face. "We'll let it go for today. We'll be back later." As Vince turned to leave, 5 middle-aged men appeared at the shop entrance. They were dressed like ordinary market vendors, but their eyes and posture set them apart. "Hey, Vinny boy, what are you doing bothering our Eleanor?" the man in front asked. His voice was casual, but his eyes were ice cold. Vince and his crew froze. They instinctively knew who these men were. Nothing. Just stopped by to say hello," Vince stammered. The middle-aged man chuckled humorlessly. "Yeah, right. We saw everything. Trying to shake down Eleanor for protection money? Eleanor the Blade from the Sterling Syndicate?" Vince's face turned ghostly white. The full gravity of his mistake hit him. His friends looked equally terrified, their legs trembling. Sterling Syndicate." Vince stuttered. The middle-aged men exchanged amused glances. "You kids have no idea who you're dealing with, do you?" One of the men turned to Eleanor and bowed deeply. "Eleanor, ma'am. Sorry about this. These kids have no manners." Eleanor gave a slight nod and turned back to her filleting knife and the flatfish, resuming her work as if nothing had happened. "They're just kids. We'll teach them a lesson. Please, let it slide this once," the middle-aged man said respectfully, but the underlying threat was unmistakable. Vince and his crew nodded frantically, sweat pouring down their faces. The middle-aged men grabbed the young thugs by their arms and dragged them out of the shop. Eleanor didn't seem to hear them leave, her focus solely on precise movements of her knife, transforming the fish into perfect slices. Dragged to the market entrance, Vince and his friends were pale with fear. "Kneel," commanded the oldest of the middle-aged men. His voice left no room for argument. The young men immediately dropped to their knees on the pavement at the market entrance. Fear was plain in their eyes. "We're sorry. We honestly didn't know. We won't do it again," Vince pleaded, his voice shaking. A crowd of merchants and tourists gathered, some already recording the scene on their phones. Ignorance is no excuse, especially not in this business. The middle-aged man said coldly, "Eleanor was a legend in the Sterling Syndicate. Few people who cross her path are still around, and only because she let them live." The young men's faces grew even paler. They pressed their foreheads to the ground. The man continued, "We're all retired now, living normal lives. So is Eleanor. But that doesn't mean we've forgotten the old days." Whispers spread through the crowd. "Those guys used to be gangsters. So that's why the market's been peaceful lately." Cold stares fixed on the kneeling youths. "So what are you going to do now?" the middle-aged man asked them. Vince trembled. "We messed up. We'll never come back to this market again. Please, just let us go." The middle-aged men exchanged glances. One spoke. "We've memorized your faces. You won't be able to pull this stunt anywhere in Port Sterling. Understand?" The young men nodded desperately, sweat dripping onto the ground. Videos of their humiliation were already spreading online. Just then, a woman emerged from Eleanor's shop, holding a plate of immaculately arranged fish. "Here, Eleanor sent this over." The middle-aged men exchanged grateful looks. One picked up a slice and ate it, his face lighting up. Wow, Eleanor's skills just get better with age. The young men remained frozen, heads bowed, finally understanding the magnitude of their blunder. One of the middle-aged men nodded towards them. "Get lost. Go turn yourselves in at the police station. If you don't, we'll bring you there ourselves." The youths scrambled to their feet and hurried away from the market, their retreat pathetic. The crowd began to disperse, and the market slowly returned to its usual rhythm. The middle-aged men walked together back towards Eleanor's shop, their steps light, but their eyes filled with deep respect. Opening the door, they found Eleanor still filleting fish. She looked up at them. "You've grown up, Leo." Eleanor's voice softened. The man who had spoken earlier, Leo, bowed respectfully. "It's been a long time, Eleanor. Good to see you doing well." Genuine affection filled his voice. 25 years ago, he had been a young foot soldier under Eleanor. Now, a middle-aged man living a straight life, his respect for her remained unchanged. "I'm fine. How's business?" Eleanor asked. The other men smiled. "We're all doing well. Thanks to you, Eleanor. We can run our businesses here peacefully because of you." Eleanor nodded, faint lines crinkling around her eyes in a rare smile. "Good. That's good to hear." Leo asked cautiously, "Eleanor, there seem to be more punks like that around lately. Should we maybe tidy things up like the old days?" Eleanor shook her head, her gaze distant. "Let it be. A knife isn't meant for harming others. It's meant for preparing fish." The middle-aged men bowed deeply, moved by her philosophy. For them, men who had escaped violent paths for ordinary lives, her words were a guiding principle. "We understand, Eleanor. Still, it's good that you're here. This market is peaceful because of you," Leo said sincerely. Eleanor said nothing, simply continued working her knife. An entire flatfish was transformed into beautiful slices in moments. "Eat before you go," she offered the plate. The men accepted gratefully, eating with obvious enjoyment. Perhaps this simple, peaceful moment was a life they had always truly wanted. Outside the shop, word spread like wildfire through the market. The legend of Eleanor was alive again. "That's Eleanor for you," merchants whispered. "We were all suffering because of those Sterling boys, and she handles it in one afternoon. Not many people know her past, how incredible she was." An old-timer sighed deeply. When the Sterling syndicate was at its peak, everyone trembled at the name Eleanor the Blade. Then one day, she just quit, said she was only going to cut fish from now on. Nobody knows why. Respect for Eleanor grew even stronger among the vendors. One quietly left a bowl of hot noodles at her shop. Another dropped off 2 fresh mackerel. These were their ways of showing gratitude. The next morning, Harbor View Fish Market was bustling as usual. Vendors arranged their wares. Tourists browsed happily. But something had changed. The merchants seemed lighter, their shoulders unburdened. Eleanor opened her shop early, as always. She tied her apron and began sharpening her knives, preparing for the first customer. Her routine was unchanged by yesterday's events. "Morning, Eleanor," called Sarah, the owner of the adjacent stall, with a bright smile. Usually a simple nod. Today her greeting felt warmer. Eleanor nodded back. "Morning." Though brief, Sarah seemed pleased. She handed Eleanor a warm cup of coffee. "Thank you so much for yesterday. You saved all of us." Eleanor accepted the coffee. It was nothing. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes. "Nothing? You have no idea how much trouble those thugs caused, especially for the younger vendors just starting out. Some were giving up half their earnings." Eleanor's expression hardened slightly. She put down her knife and looked at Sarah. "Was it that bad?" Sarah nodded vigorously. "Yes, it was awful. And when people reported it to the police, they said there wasn't enough evidence to investigate properly. But after that video went viral yesterday, the police finally started moving." Eleanor looked puzzled. "Video?" Sarah pulled out her phone. The screen showed Vince and his crew kneeling at the market entrance. The video already had hundreds of thousands of views. This spread like crazy online. Titled Legendary Fishmonger of Harborview Market. People are curious about you now, Eleanor. Eleanor looked uncomfortable, old memories seemingly surfacing. The days when she was known as Eleanor the Blade. I don't need that. I just want to live quietly, she said, weariness in her voice. She had tried to escape her past. This attention was unwelcome. Sarah nodded understandingly. I know. Don't worry. It'll blow over soon. Despite Sarah's words, more customers than usual visited Eleanor's stall that day, mostly curious tourists wanting a glimpse of the legendary fishmonger. Eleanor worked silently, her hands moving with the same precise, beautiful skill. In the afternoon, a police car stopped near the market. 2 officers got out and walked towards Eleanor's shop. Nearby vendors watched nervously. The officers entered the shop. Are you Eleanor Vance? The taller officer asked politely. Assuming a last name for Eleanor, Eleanor paused while serving a customer and looked up, giving a silent nod. We need to ask you a few questions about yesterday's incident. Eleanor finished with her customer, wiped her hands clean, her expression calm. The officers followed her to a small table in the back. Were you aware of the group calling themselves the Sterling Boys before yesterday? The second officer asked. No, haven't been here that long, Eleanor replied concisely. The officers exchanged glances. They seemed aware of her past. We understand you were previously associated with the Sterling Syndicate. Eleanor's eyes grew cold. She paused before speaking. That was 20 years ago. Now I just sell fish. The officer nodded. Yes, of course. We just need your statement about yesterday. The members of the Sterling Boys turned themselves in. Eleanor's eyebrows raised slightly. Oh, yes. They confessed everything, threatening merchants, extorting money, including threatening you specifically. Eleanor shrugged. It wasn't much. I just told them to leave. The officer smiled faintly. We saw the video. You didn't do anything overt, Ms. Vance, but the sight of them kneeling and apologizing was memorable. Eleanor didn't reply, gazing out the window thoughtfully. The officer continued, Actually, we have information that this group was operating in several markets across Port Sterling. Thanks to you, we were able to apprehend all of them. The merchants are very grateful. Eleanor's expression flickered. She seemed slightly taken aback that her actions had unintentionally helped so many. It wasn't my doing. I was just protecting my shop. The officer smiled at her humility. Well, thank you anyway. We don't have any more questions for now. We'll be going. Just as the officers were about to leave, Leo and a few of the other middle-aged men entered the shop. They tensed upon seeing the police, but relaxed when Eleanor gave a slight nod. Eleanor, are you all right? Leo asked quietly. Eleanor nodded. Police are done. Don't worry. The officers looked between Eleanor and the men, a hint of suspicion in their eyes, but they simply nodded politely and left. Eleanor turned to the men and smiled, a rare occurrence. Thanks, all of you. Leo and his friends beamed. Eleanor's smile was a great reward for them. A week passed. Peace returned to Harborview Fish Market. The threat of the Sterling Boys was gone, and vendors focused on their businesses with relief. Curious tourists still occasionally stopped by Eleanor's stall, but the initial frenzy was fading. Eleanor opened her shop early, as always. She wiped down counters, sharpened knives, prepared fish. Her daily rhythm continued, undisturbed. However, the attitude of her fellow merchants had changed. They now greeted her with deference and often left small gifts. After the lunch rush, Leo visited the shop carrying a large paper bag. Eleanor, there's something you need to see. He pulled out a small wooden plaque, carved into it with the words, A knife isn't meant for harming others. It's meant for preparing fish. Eleanor Vance. Eleanor stared at the plaque, surprised, then looked at Leo. What's this? Leo smiled. We had it made to hang at the market entrance. Your words were too good not to share with everyone. Eleanor was momentarily speechless, a flicker of emotion in her eyes. The idea that her hard-won philosophy resonated with others pleased her. That's unnecessary. She started, but there was no real objection in her voice. Leo seemed to understand. Eleanor, we all learn from you how to leave the past behind and start fresh. To us, you'll always be a legend. Eleanor looked out the window at the bustling market, vendors laughing, tourists enjoying themselves. This was the peaceful, everyday life she had wanted. All right, do as you wish, she finally conceded. Leo bowed happily and left with a plaque. That afternoon, the new plaque was hung at the market entrance. Passers-by stopped to read the inscription. Some took pictures. The simple sentence, embodying Eleanor's philosophy, struck a chord with many. As sunset approached, Eleanor began closing her shop. She cleaned the counters and packed the remaining fish on ice. As she was taking off her apron, the shop door opened. "Sorry, we're closed." Eleanor's words trailed off. Standing in the doorway was a face she hadn't seen in a very long time. Her old mentor, Silas, the former head of the Sterling Syndicate. "Eleanor, been keeping well?" The old man's voice was gentle. Eleanor's eyes widened. She simply nodded, unable to speak. "I heard what happened. They say your knife skills are still sharp," Silas said with a smile. Eleanor's expression softened slightly. "Only for filleting fish now, mentor." Silas walked over to her workstation and picked up the filleting knife, examining it. "I always told you, depending on how it's used, a knife can save a life or take one. You finally found the right path, didn't you?" Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes. She bowed deeply before her mentor. "How about I taste some fish prepared by my student?" "Like old times," Silas suggested. Eleanor smiled and picked up her knife again. Her hands moved with the legendary skill she possessed. It seemed Eleanor had finally found true peace, leaving the shadows of her past behind, continuing to write her own legend, one slice of fish at a time.